Good morning. Happy Sunday, everybody. I'm excited for this afternoon because after church today, we're going to go to the Needham Harvest Festival. We actually have a group of college students from South Carolina that are helping us, helping set up for everybody, run the event, and then once we're all done with church, we're going to go there together and be there for the afternoon. So if you have that time this afternoon, let's be at the Harvest Festival, meeting people, meeting our community, inviting them to church. I think it was a really great, tangible way for us to show that our church cares about our community. And it was amazing to have that team come in because they were able to give us a presence there and help serve our town. And then we didn't have to sacrifice gathering as a church at the same time, which is powerful. So this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to meet a lot of new people, a lot of invitations going out towards church. But super excited for us to be back in the book of Luke. So some of you guys know we took last month off, and we went through and talked about our core distinctives, who we are as a church. What do we believe? When somebody asks you, what kind of church is Avenue? What do we say? So we talked about that. If you missed that, all 4 of those are on YouTube, so that we can catch up on that. But we're back in the book of Luke. And what I love about where we're going today is that we get to a point in the book where it's going to shift. Things have changed. A little bit of like a recap. If you don't remember what we talked about a month ago, which is fine, doesn't hurt my feelings. I won't take it personal. So a month ago, we had just covered the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus on the Mount reveals his full glory to the disciples. And he does this right after he asks the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And of course, the disciples give a bunch of bad answers. And then Peter, gets it right for once and says, "You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah sent from God." And Jesus goes, "You're correct." And upon that statement, upon that proclamation of truth, I'm going to build this church. And then he reveals his true glory. And then what we see happens is we see a shift. So right here, our sermon title, our message title, if you didn't grab your sermon notes in the back, we can have somebody bring you a sermon notes page. Mr. Justin? Yep. Nice. Mr. Justin loves it. That's ironic because he loves the sermon notes and then he didn't get one himself. So funny. Mr. Justin will throw... I had a middle school, this is random, but I had a middle school science teacher that would pass out papers by just throwing them up into the room. And for major tests, he would count one less than the number of kids, and he would just throw them. And if you didn't get a test, you failed. So it was kind of crazy. I don't think that was appropriate. But so grab a sermon notes page and come on in. So this morning we're talking about the cost of following Jesus. Look at all these amazing college kids coming in today. Yay! This is our mission team, everybody. Yay! These guys are awesome. They were helping out set up for the Harvest Festival. You guys are amazing. I know I have an accolade. Yeah, you guys are great. Thanks for being here. Our sermon title is The Cost of Following Jesus. And what Jesus does in Luke chapter 9 is that we see a shift. It's a hinge moment, actually, in the gospel. Because up until now, Luke has been detailing the annunciation of John the Baptist, the annunciation of Jesus, the birth of John the Baptist, the birth of Jesus, the life of John the Baptist, the life of Jesus, and then the early ministry of Jesus up until the Mount of Transfiguration. And then for the next 10 chapters, don't be scared, the next 10 chapters, what Luke does is he kind of stops going so methodical with the history. He'll spend the next 10 chapters detailing the journey from Galilee down to Jerusalem. Like Jesus has now told his people, we are going to Jerusalem for me to be offered up and killed. And the disciples hear that and they're shocked. They're like, we don't like that. But Jesus says, this is where we're going. Historically, we would call this the Passion of the Christ. The Passion being the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And Jesus telling his disciples, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. We are going to Jerusalem. I will be killed. I will be buried, and I will come back 3 days later. And they just are going, I don't like this. And so for the next 10 chapters in the book of Luke, we're going to spend, we don't know how much time passes in this section, but what Luke does is he gives us what does it look like to follow Jesus. Jesus spends this time with his disciples and the other followers explaining to them what it looks like to be a Christian. If you are going to be a Christian, this is what you will look like. This is who you're going to be. This is the kind of choices you'll make. This is how you'll be defined as, and this is what it'll cost you. So it's free to follow Jesus. Like when Jesus lays down his life on the cross for us, the cost of picking that up for us is free. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to become something. I don't have to think a certain way. I don't have to, like we talk about here all the time, that we stand against moralism and legalism. I don't have to become something to receive the love of Christ. But once I have picked up that free gift, once I have received that free gift that he's given me, it's going to cost me something. Like it'll mean something. Like I'm not in charge of my life anymore. It says that the word says that I have been bought with a price. I belong to Jesus. He's my authority. So my life, it will cost me something to follow Jesus. And that's what Luke does in the next 10 chapters as he explains, what does it look like? What will it cost you to follow Jesus? He begins his journey to Jerusalem. Luke is going to devote these 10 chapters. What does it look like? What does it look like to be a follower? So we're going to talk about 3 costs today. That's where we're going. 3 costs. The cost of comfort, the cost of delaying, and the cost of divided loyalty. So I think I have a map for you guys. Yeah, I love graphics. Look at this. It's beautiful. I'm so excited. I don't have the pointer. Remember when I tried the laser pointer and I realized it didn't work on TVs? That was embarrassing. Part of me, is it like a classroom guy? Is like, I wanted to show you guys this and have like a chart and all kinds of stuff and handouts. I didn't have friends growing up. Leave me alone, okay? So this is a map of Jerusalem. This is a kind of a map actually of the journey of Jesus. And what's cool is that Luke uses travel narrative to explain his gospel. So it's about the movement of Christ. And so Jesus is up here at the top. That's Galilee. That's the region that him and his disciples are from. It's kind of the backwaters. This would be, for a lack of a better word, the redneck part of Jerusalem. You would have said, nothing good is up there. That's where the hillbillies are. Nothing good comes out of Galilee, my people. And that's where Jesus and his crew were from. So they start off in Galilee, and then they start moving downwards, because Jesus' ultimate goal is to go to Jerusalem, which is in the south, down there in Judea. So you see that's the pinkish, salmonish color. What color is that? Salmon? Salmon. Salmon. Defazio. Defazio. I don't know. That's the fun about English, isn't it? What a nightmare language. Anyway, whatever color that is, that's where he's going. What's funny is that in the middle, that's Samaria. That's the region in between. We're going to spend 10 chapters from Jesus going from the top to the bottom, and we don't really see a chart. And what's cool about this, when I think about how Luke does this, I think of a TV show. I don't know if your family are TV show people, but there's a style of television shows, syndicated, 24-season shows, where the whole season is telling one big story, but you could watch the episodes out of order. You ever seen shows like that? I kind of like shows like that. You can turn it on, and no matter what, you watch that episode and go, oh, that was in season 3, but you could watch it out of order. But then by the end of the season, at the season finale, there would have been a story, a climax, all those pieces would have fit together. That's the type of episode that we're about to get. So that's exciting. I don't know if that would be Lost. You guys ever watch the TV show Lost? Not like that. You have to watch that in order. Very confusing show. So anyway, the next 10 chapters are going to detail this journey down. So what I love here, we're going to go to Luke chapter 9, verse 51. We're going to start off here. This is when the days grew near for him to be taken up, when it was time for him to go, when it was time for the passion, Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples James and John saw that, they said, Lord, do you want us to nuke these people? That's the Burt translation. Would you like us to kill them? I'm like, first of all, where have you been? We've been doing this for a while now. John and James are right-hand men, top disciples. Don't you understand that Jesus is about grace? He's about sacrifice. He's about mercy. And they're like, we should kill these people. That's why these 2 dudes were known as, great nicknames, the Sons of Thunder. That's a nickname. I'm just saying. If somebody was like, yo, that's Sons of Thunder over there, that's a sick nickname. But also, don't kill people. All right, here we go. And Jesus turns and looks at these two dudes, and he rebukes them. And they went on to another village instead. So there's 2 things here, and then we're going to get into our 3 costs. But the first one is this, is that Jesus sets his face towards Jerusalem. And that's a very interesting phrase. That's a very different way of thinking about how they would have said we're starting a journey. Instead of saying we're starting a journey, this is where we're going, it says Jesus sets his face. And that was a very interesting Hebrew phrase that you would have said, I know I'm going to suffer, but I'm setting my resolve to it. I know I'm about to do something difficult. I know I'm about to suffer. I know this is going to be painful. And Jesus says, I'm going anyway. It's like that John Wayne mentality. I love that. It's it's going to be tough, but I'm saddling up anyway. I'm setting my face to Jerusalem, knowing Jesus knew full well that when he got to Jerusalem, he would be persecuted, he would be tortured, he would be crucified. He knew, being fully God, what was waiting for him on the other side. And he still went. That's so stinking good that he sets his face toward Jerusalem. And he has this mission-mindedness. The Father has called him to lay down his life. And Jesus, in obedience, answers that call. So Jesus sets the standard. So Jesus and God, of course, being one, triune in the Trinity, but Jesus is still obedient to the Father. Still sets a level of, okay, this is what God asks of him. What are you going to do? And Jesus goes, I'm setting my face, Father. I'm going to Jerusalem. I know what's going to happen to me there. I'm still going. He sets this amazing standard that is the foundational element of discipleship. That if you are to be somebody who follows Jesus, first of all, that foundational element is found in setting your face and recognizing that that resolve that he had towards Jerusalem was for you. Was for you. One of my favorite ways to think about this is that when Jesus was heading to that cross and when Jesus was on that cross, he had your name on his lips, on his heart. Being fully God, knowing before the foundation of all of creation, he knew you, created specifically for this time in this place. He knit you together in your mother's womb. He knew you intimately and he loved you. He said, I'm setting my face to Jerusalem for Bert Parker. I'm setting my face towards Jerusalem for Felipe. I'm setting my face towards Jerusalem for Chip. He sets his face for you. He was heading towards his death, burial, and resurrection for us. For those who would say, yes, Jesus, you can take my place. My discipleship rests on that commitment that Jesus had. That's where it starts. And that Jesus knew he was going to suffer, and he went anyway. That's the level of love that Christ has for us. And then the journey begins. Like I said, they moved south to a place called to the Samaritans. And these were a group of people that were spread out around the area of Samaria. And this is a little history. Some of you guys don't like history. Sorry. But you kind of need to know this, because who are these people? Who are these people? The Samaritans actually were an offshoot of Judaism. They were an offset of Jews, that the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other's guts. Like they could not stand one another. And that's because the Samaritans found their birth way long time ago with two famous evil kings and queens of Israel named King Ahaz and Queen Jezebel. Queen Jezebel was brought in from a different region to be queen to marry King Ahaz. This is in the book of Kings, 2 Kings, in the Old Testament. And Jezebel gets brought in from a different region. She has her own religion, and she mixes that and intermingles that with Ahaz's Judaism. And Ahaz, being a coward and a punk and a chump, goes, sure, lady, I'll just give up everything I'm ever supposed to do and mislead this entire nation because I love you. And so he merges Judaism with this other extra religion, creating the Samaritan faith. And so it's like Judaism light. It has like a version of it, but it also institutes a ton of really evil, pagan, demonic things. Child sacrifice, sexual promiscuity, like just unreal sin gets brought into the nation of Israel. And God sends Elijah to correct this man, and sends in Elijah to correct Ahaz and Queen Jezebel. Anyway, they are, of course, are removed from power, but the Samaritans keep going. They keep existing. And they actually have a place, they get bigger, and they have their thing, and then this animosity exists. In fact, the Jews disliked the Samaritans so much that when they were making that journey down to Jerusalem every year, they would go out and around, extending their trip by several days, walking many extra miles, just so they wouldn't be close to walking towards a Samaritan. These people were unclean. And Jesus, as they're making their descent down, says, we're just going to make a beeline straight down. We're just going to go and we're going to stop, and we're actually going to stay in a Samaritan village. And his disciples would have been like, you're in charge, but we don't like this. And so what Jesus does, it says this in the next verses, that he sent messengers ahead of him. Because this is an entourage. In our minds, this is not just Jesus and the 12 disciples. There's actually Jesus, the 12 apostles, and at least 72 disciples, and then an undisclosed huge number of people with him. And so Jesus, as they're heading to this town, says, let's send a group ahead. Let them know that we're coming. Give them a fair warning. There's a large group of us. We're coming into town. We're going to be hungry. We're going to need a place to stay. We've got money, but we're coming in. Give them an early warning sign. That's like a courtesy. You don't just show up at somebody's house, right? Maybe you have people who did that at your house. I always think of like Everybody Loves Raymond, where they would just go into each other's houses all the time, and I thought that was normal as a kid, that you just would walk into people's homes. Bad. But Jesus goes, no, we're not just going to have that. We're going to give them a warning. We're going to let them know. And when the people did not receive him, so that the Samaritans catch wind that Jesus is on the way. They catch wind that this huge group of people are coming in, that this prophet, this traveling rabbi, this very famous person is coming their way, and they say, don't let him in. And in this culture, this was a shame-honor culture. And so to be disrespected like this would have been a huge crime, would have been a huge faux pas. And hence why James and John get so upset. They get so angry at this. So he encounters rejection again. And what you'll see, and Luke highlights this very clearly throughout his gospel, is that Jesus is rejected everywhere he goes. He was rejected in his hometown before he started his ministry. He's rejected in Samaria before he even can end his ministry. So even as this part is winding down of his ministry, he is still being rejected by people. Why? Why would they say no to this celebrity? Why would they say no to this? People at the time who weren't following Jesus still thought he was a prophet. Why did they say no to that? Why would they reject that? What was their issue? Their issue was that he wasn't coming for them. He wasn't coming to do it their way. And I think this is so pertinent and powerful because this is us today. Because we have issues with Jesus when he doesn't do what we want him to do for us. When he doesn't give us what we think we deserve. And the Samaritans said, if the prophet is coming towards us, he's got to do what we want. He's got to follow our traditions. And what do you mean his face is set towards Jerusalem? No. We want his face set towards us. Like we want him to do things our way. He didn't conform to their expectations of where God should be worshipped or how his kingdom should be, how his kingdom should come to earth. They wanted him on their terms. But Jesus was set for the Father's plan, not theirs. And like I said, this is an issue we have all of the time today. I think a major part of where we get atheism in our country today is from people who feel disenfranchised by what they didn't get from God. They had an expectation that God must do things how I want him to do things. Now, he's got to answer my prayers. He has to get me that job. He has to take away this diagnosis. And how could this evil thing exist? If he's good, how could something bad exist? He must not exist. He must not be real. And it's this anger that bubbles up because God's not fitting into their box. And I think even as a follower of Jesus, that's something I have to check my heart on all the time when I get frustrated. Like, do I want God to do for me what I want him to do for me? Or do I want to be conformed to his standard? And here you have an entire region of people that had they just brought Jesus in, had they had welcomed him in, of course Jesus would have scooped them all up. He would have brought them with. He would have said, you're with me. But instead they said, Jesus, we only want you if you're going to do for us what we want. And that's the improper response in discipleship to Jesus. Like if you are only going to Christ for what you can get, if you're only going to Christ for your benefit and your gain, Christ says, no, it's my way or it's the byways, it's the highways. You can choose. But the Samaritans get this wrong. And if it's, what we see here with the two disciples getting this wrong is that they still, this is the power of the Gospels. This is the power of the New Testament, is that it includes the failings and the shortcomings of the disciples. If you take this argument, the disciples were trying to start their own religion, they lied, they were manipulating Jesus' teachings, and the story of the New Testament is false. Like, you would not have included a story like this showing just how messed up John and James were in this moment. This was a huge moment of weakness. That when the Samaritans reject them, when they go into the shame-honor culture and the Samaritans are like disrespecting Jesus, how dare you disrespect Jesus? They say, we should kill these people for dishonoring Jesus. Jesus is like, whoa. Like, what's wild is that Jesus rebukes his own people. He looks at John and James and says, you guys are getting it wrong. Stop wanting judgment. You should desire mercy. In fact, Psalm 51, King David said that he's singing this song of lamentation, this song of sadness, and he says to God, like, you don't want my religious behavior, God. You want my heart. Like, you don't want me to be somebody who makes sacrifices and goes through the motions. You want my actual heart. You want my affections. And this is where John and James get it wrong, because they want judgment and wrath and destruction. We got Jesus. We're on the right team. Forget everybody else. Like, if they don't want to be with us, they should be dead. It's like, I could not even imagine Jesus in that moment, just the double take he must have done. Like, what do you mean? What? You want to kill the people who say no to us. And he says, no. the ministry of Jesus is marked by mercy, and therefore the disciples, if you are a disciple, a follower of Jesus, you and I must be defined by our mercy. And this is tough, because sure, we don't call down, brimstone and hellfire on our enemies, but we don't pray for our enemies. We don't want the best for our enemies. We don't love and serve our enemies. We don't necessarily say that they should be nuked, but we don't show them mercy. So there's a powerful lesson in this for a Christian in the year 2025. What's your perspective on the people you don't like? Because as Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem, he set his face towards Jerusalem for your enemies, just as much as he did for you. And if I'm the kind of person who has received the grace and the mercy of Jesus, then therefore I must be somebody who is giving the grace and the mercy of Jesus to others. The person who has betrayed you, the person who has hurt you the most. This is not a permissiveness. There's no license for this. It's not okay that these people hurt you, but whoever that person was that hurt you was someone that Jesus died for. And the radical difference of the Christian faith is I don't see that person as scum, or I don't see that person as wanting the worst for them. Instead, I say, I will pray for the betterment of my enemies. I will show mercy. I will be long-suffering for those who have harmed me. That's what will get a broken world's attention. Because the rest of the world sees their enemies as enemies, and they want the worst for them. But a follower of Jesus says, no. The people who have harmed me the worst, the people that have hurt my soul the most, the people who have betrayed me at the deepest level, that parent that I can't forgive, that best friend that turned their back on me, whatever the situation is, when we respond with mercy, it puts the gospel on display. Because it doesn't make sense to a dying, broken world. And Jesus in this moment says, John and James, you guys are getting this wrong. I don't desire judgment. I desire mercy. So let's look at this. The next is we get the 3 costs. And what this is that 3 people, as they're making this journey, come up to Jesus. And they want to be part of the show. They want to join in. And so they come up to him and say, Jesus, I want you. I want this life. I want all this. This is exciting. I want to be a part of this. And Jesus goes, in kind of a savage way, let's discuss this. And so there are 3 things here, 3 different situations that we have. As they were going along the road, this is in verse 54, I believe, 57. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. Bold. Wouldn't that be a powerful prayer for us to say that to Jesus? Jesus, wherever you go, I'll go. And Jesus looks at this man, and seeing his heart, he says, the foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And we'll stop there. Let's look at the cost of comfort. Because the cost of discipleship, the cost of following Jesus means that comfort is off the table. This doesn't mean that I'm being called to look for a harder life. This doesn't mean that I reject these things. But this man's problem and his barrier to discipleship was in his heart of hearts that Jesus could perceive, hence why Jesus answers it this way. He said, this is a man who loves and idolizes comfort. He tells him the foxes have holes, and this is an interesting phrase because the word fox here is what they would have used to describe the Romans. That would have been a derogatory term that they would have used to describe King Herod and the Roman occupants. They would have called them foxes, people who were like thieves and robbers. Sure, they look good on the outside. They had great buildings and uniformed soldiers, and they looked so like put together. How you would see a fox. You would look at a fox in the wild and be like, wow, that thing is cute. That's really adorable. Until it runs off with your cat. You're like, bad fox. We had a fox in our street the other day, and I remember being like, holy cow, that's a fox. Like, that's a cool looking animal. I love that. And it's like, but that thing would eat anything smaller than it, and tear it apart. Like, it looks great on the outside, but inside it's a hunter. And that was what the Jews would call Romans back then. They said, you look good on the outside. You guys got it all put together. The Roman infrastructure, you guys look good, but you are killing us. And he says the foxes have their homes, and the birds have their nests. He's like, the enemies have a place. They have their dwelling. They have their security. They have their comfort. But when you follow Jesus, you must be willing to sacrifice comfort and stability for something bigger, for something grander. So Jesus tells this first man to follow him. It means that it's going to cost you some earthly security in response for eternal purpose. It's radically depending on God. And until you've been in a place where life has forced you to depend on God, this seems kind of like cliche. Oh yeah, I should be willing to go anywhere. I should be willing to do that. I should be willing to be uncomfortable. And in the United States in 2025, we live very, very comfortable lives. And I think if any of the costs that are going to slow us down and keep us from following Jesus at a closer level, secretly it'll be this one. Because it's like, oh, I want Jesus, but in a safe, comfortable, relaxing way. I want him on my terms. I don't want it to cost me a little bit of my comfort. What do you mean next week I have to get up early for church? Ooh, sunrise service, gotcha. Because next week we're meeting at 9 because of issues. But it's like, that was a joke. Sorry. No, I'm not. What does it mean it's going to cost you? And we don't. Okay, I'm going to soapbox time. We want Jesus on our terms until it costs us something. And then we don't pick Jesus anymore. That is the American church to the T. If the Apostle Paul were alive today and he was writing a letter to the American church, he would say, you don't really want Christ. You just want to sprinkle him on. You just want to add him. When you have time in your schedule, when you don't have a game going on, when you don't have this happening, then you'll give time for the Lord. But the cost of discipleship, like I said, means that I have to be willing to place all of my security on the table. Would I follow Jesus if I were bankrupt? Would I follow Jesus if everything I had was gone? Would I follow Jesus if there was no other security blanket in my way? Hence why when Jesus talks about money, he says the reason why people worship money so much is because it gives them security. It gives them comfort. And if I'm going to follow Jesus, I've got to be somebody who's willing to place it on the table. Following him is not about gaining more safety, more comfort, but it's about trusting God enough to walk into hard things. Being willing to walk into rejection. Being willing to sacrifice. What would it look like if we as a church at Avenue were willing to do hard things for the gospel? If we were willing to be inconvenienced? If we were willing and open to having our schedules interrupted by Christ? I think it would change the name of the game. So Jesus looks at this first guy and says, do you want to follow me? What's it going to cost you? You, it would cost your comfort. The second one is this. There's a sense of urgency here in being a disciple of Jesus and being a follower of Christ. And he says there's a cost of delay. And this guy comes to Jesus and says this. He goes, okay, I want to follow you. This one's different. Verse 59. To another man, Jesus says, follow me. So Jesus actually invites this guy. That's different. Imagine being personally invited by Jesus to join the crew and then having an excuse. He says, follow me. He said, okay, but Lord, first let me go and bury my father. And Jesus says to him, how about you leave the dead to bury their own dead? But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. That reads savage. That's tough. We read that and we're like, okay, Jesus, that didn't feel very warm and fluffy and nice. That was a little aggressive. I like it. And here's why. This is what, when the first time I ever read that passage, I remember this kid being like, that's kind of mean. What do you mean that a man's father has died and he just wants to bury his father? What is Jesus saying in this? I'll tell you. Jesus makes a powerful statement here about priorities. Radical priority. In this culture, in this day, a son's obligation to his father was his primary objective. So he was responsible for his dad, the eldest son. And so when your father died, burying and going through the rites and the processes of putting your father into the grave and sending him off was a son's highest priority. In fact, in their culture, it was allowed to be higher than temple worship. Your attendance in synagogue was lowered so that you as a son can honor your father better. And it became this very, what's the right word for it? Materialized version of honoring your dad. You had to put on a show to a certain degree. And he's saying, hey, how about instead of going through and making this the biggest priority, why don't you make what's important important? Following Jesus takes absolute priority, even over good things. Making sure your father gets a funeral, that's a good thing. But how often in life are we missing out on the greatness of God because of good things? And he says, make sure your priorities are right. Let those who are spiritual, he makes a word on being dead and alive. And of course, throughout the New Testament, the idea of being a follower of Jesus means that you exist in the kingdom of life. That's a kind of a phrase that goes throughout. And if those who are not in Christ, it's savage, but it says that you and I, before Jesus, belong to the kingdom of death. Spiritual death, not necessarily physical death, but spiritual death, that my heart is dead. It's a stone. And the only thing that puts life back into that is the Holy Spirit, that Jesus gives me a heart of flesh, gives me a heart that can feel, gives me a heart of love, and that Jesus is the source of life. And that's what happened with Adam and Eve in the garden. When you walk away and reject the author of life, you get death. And so Jesus here is saying, your father is physically dead. He's physically dead. He said, now let people deal with that physical problem, but you need to make sure that you don't become spiritual, that you don't stay spiritually dead. He says, let those who are spiritually dead take care of earthly problems. You have been called to an eternal one. Jesus invites this man personally to join the ministry, to join what's happening, and this man makes an excuse, and he thinks he comes up with a good excuse. And I think for us today, it challenges us, what good excuses have I used to try to get out of serving the Lord? Well, I have to do this. I have to do that. Like, we come up with something that is good on paper. Like, nobody would look at that and be like, no, it's bad. Like, that's not a bad thing. But we will take a good thing and elevate it higher. And Jesus says, no. The priority, the number one priority should be the kingdom of heaven, is chasing after your Father, is following me. You have Jesus, God in a body, standing right in front of you saying, won't you come and be a part of this? And you're making an excuse. That's such a big warning for us today. Because there's no delay. There's no time for this. And this is a phrase I said that you'll have people who are like, oh, I'll get my life right. I'll follow Jesus one day. I just don't want to do that right now. And a great phrase that I heard one time that's very haunting is that the man who waits for the 11th hour tends to die at 10:30. He said, there's no time. You think you have time to bury your father. You think you have time to delay it. You think you've come up with a good excuse to put off doing the things of God. And Jesus says, that good thing that you want to do is an idol. Get your priorities straight. Be focused on the eternal. And then the last man he has this conversation with is the cost of divided loyalty. It says this in verse 61. Yet another man said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at home. And Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. I'm going to get a little redneck with you guys, because when I read this passage in my head, my family has always had like a patch of land back in Georgia, and different parts, my dad and even my other, like my grandparents, like would live there on this patch of land, and they kind of farmed it at different times. It's mostly for pine trees. That's what we farmed. And then my dad did a stint where he did cows, and then my grandparents moved there, and my granddad was like, yeah, we're going full on corn. And just like started planting rows and rows and rows of corn, which was great to play in as a kid, terrible to shuck. Oh my gosh. I was like, please, I just want anything else. Give me back my Super Nintendo. I want to be free from this. But with that, one of the most enjoyable parts of that was when I was allowed to drive the tractor to plow the lines. Right, when we had tilled it up and we were ready, we were prepared the soil, and they would let me drive this huge, massive tractor, probably too young, and all I had to do was drive that tractor straight. I needed to make the rows as uniform and as lined up as possible. And it was nerve-wracking because if you got off just a little bit, if you didn't keep that thing perfectly in line, this massive tractor, if I didn't keep it in line just a little bit, the rows would turn off. And it was so funny because I remember there was a time where my dad was helping my granddad with something else. They were gone, and they left me to my rows, and I did my rows. And I remember getting off the tractor, parking it, and being like, that might be the best set of rows I've ever seen in my life. Like, I know I killed this. And I stand up from my seat, I turn around and I look, and it was like Picasso. Just ruined. The whole thing, like, was zigzagged. Like, I was like, had gotten off on the first one, and so the rest of it had been kind of like this weird fan way. I don't know what, it looked like I may have been drinking. I was like 10 years old. And I was like, this is terrible. My dad and my granddad come outside, and it's like, hey, guess what you have to do? Start over. I had to completely start over. I had to scrape the field. I had to start over. I had to do the lines again. And then this time I had a lot more supervision, which is probably their fault. They should have been watching me. I was a child. Anyway, when I mess up that line and I got off just a little bit, it was because I wasn't focused on what I was doing. And Jesus used an agricultural illustration with this guy to help him understand, hey, listen, like, this is an illustration you understand, that when you're plowing, that food is your source of life. Making sure that you plant that well to get the maximum yield from your harvest determines whether or not your family eats this winter. It's important, so get it right. And this illustration would have made sense to them because if you don't take it seriously and you get off a little bit, or you start plowing and you look over your shoulder and you're trying to make sure you're still looking at the old, then you're going to miss where you're going and you'll mess up the rest and cause destruction. So Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, because this guy says, let me go home and take care of some stuff at home first. Let me look back to where I was. And Jesus goes, no. Following me, discipleship, means that when you follow Jesus, you keep your eyes on the prize. I don't look back to the old me. Like the old sin that haunts, the old patterns of destructive choices that I used to make, the old places I used to go, the old people I used to be around, the old decisions I used to make, that when I follow Christ, I don't even look back. It's that idea that we kind of like, I kind of want both, right? I want Jesus and the old me. So Jesus goes, no. If you're following me, it's eyes on the prize. And this is not to say that when you become a Christian, you never sin ever again. That's not what he's talking about. What he's saying here is that this idea of looking back is like a prolonged staring, like a staring of longing. That when you've decided to follow Jesus and you look back at that old sin and you go, wow, I kind of missed that. That's the issue. You can't have the forward-facing kingdom of heaven ahead of you and still want the old you at the same time. He says you got to let go of that. So in that culture, everyone knew exactly what he was talking about. You can't keep looking back. The discipleship, like plowing, demands a steady forward gaze. That to follow Jesus means that I stay focused. I stay where I'm going. Because if I get off a little bit, it leads to destruction. The plowman who looks back ruins the row. And the disciple who looks back loses his way. When you as a plowman look back, you'll mess up the row every time. But if you're a follower of Jesus who's looking back at his old life and missing it, you're going to miss the way that Jesus has for you. You're going to miss the direction that he wants for your life. He's going to miss the blessings that he has laid out for you to reach those who are far from him. Because you still want the old stuff. You still have a longing for the old you. And he says, no. To follow Jesus means to let go of that. So Jesus walked this journey. He walked the journey of discipleship. For the next 10 chapters, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what it looks like to follow Jesus. And we're going to get some of the most famous parables, some really huge miracles. And these 10 chapters are going to lead us right up to the gates of Jerusalem as Jesus gets ready to finish out his passion and to lay down his life on that cross. And so he walks and he leads towards with resolve, mercy, and urgency. Resolve, mercy, and urgency. And the invitation to follow him is the invitation for the same thing, that you and I have our faces set upon the kingdom of heaven. We know it's going to be tough. We know it's not going to be easy. But we are setting our faces towards the glory of God. That's where we're going. And I'm not looking back. I'm not going to be double-minded. I'm going to keep my hand to the plow for the things of God, which are walking deeper in my love for Jesus and reaching those who are far from Christ. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this